It just takes a second to connect to the server. All right, so welcome to Math 20. I'm not sure exactly what the official title is, something like the GOAT of all goats or something like that. This is essentially a sports analytics class. And the goal is to have some fun and to write a paper. I've been working on this for a while with a good colleague of mine, a statistics professor from Eastern Massachusetts. He will be coming out to visit us, I believe, next Friday. So looking forward to having him on campus. He should be coming in Thursday night, and we'll figure out exactly what's going on and when. In terms of the mechanics for the class, you'll let me know what times work well. We're not going to have too many meetings en masse. You will have them as necessary. The goal is to break you up into smaller groups and to really try to figure out what are the right statistics to look at, who are the right contenders to look at. So the first thing is to decide, what do we mean by a sport? So anybody know what sport I played according to some definitions in high school? This is your chance to either try to get on my good side or bad side, depending on what you say. Chess, yes, exactly. So I was one of the captains of the chess team, which was considered a sport. No jackets, of course, but. So do you consider something like chess a sport, yes or no? It's definitely not a team sport unless you're playing bug house. What features do you think of when you think of a team sport? Wins and losses. Oh, team sport. Team sport. So for instance, ice skating, where it's just, single. Would that be a sport? Yes, but not a team sport. Points.
Individual.
Okay, individual roles. So if we have a team sport, there should definitely be individual roles and things that you can assign value to the different players, or actually to the staff as well. Coach, and so coach as well as the owner and maybe the stats people now. Major League Baseball is going to be shifting next year to no shifts. And so you have seen the impact of the mathematicians, sabermetricians in baseball. And a lot of people are disgusted by this. The story is that when they shifted on Ted Williams, decades ago, he stepped out of the batter's box and just looked at, well, okay. They went in and then hit the ball to where there was no one. And that was the end of the shift against Ted Williams. Is that he was able to adjust. You don't have to be as effective, you just have to be good enough so that they stop doing it. In tennis, when you're serving, people often protect their backhand on the serve. And so depending on what you do, you might move over a little bit more towards the line and open up more of an alley. If you open up too much of an alley, what's the server going to do? You're going to hit it down there. And so it's a really nice optimization problem as to how far do you go over. When you're trying to practice your serve, how much time do you spend practicing your forehand versus backhand, defenses as well as serving? You're going to.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, winners, or sometimes ties. Major League Baseball, it would be apocalyptic if there was a tie again. We can't have that. But other sports have ties. And you have to decide how much is a tie worth. So how much is a tie worth in hockey? 1, and a win is 2. How much is it worth in soccer or football, as the rest of the world says? And a win is 3. So how many people followed World Cup? So there were a lot of interesting calculations where the US had ties initially, which 3 ties is not as good as 1 win and 2 losses. I'm sorry, 3 wins is as good as 3 ties is equal to 1 win. Whereas in hockey, it's 2 ties equals 1 win. What's the right assignment of points? But so what do you want to consider team sports? For the purpose of this class, it would be wonderful to be able to come up with, the GOAT of all goats, the greatest of all time. There's no way you are ever going to solve a question like this. This is a question that is basically designed to have conversations in bars and journals and whatnot. As long as you can say something meaningful, it's just a fun topic to have. But the question is too broad. And so we need to narrow down sports a little bit. Which sports do we want to consider? Given the collection of people in this room, if you don't yell this out.
Major 4 sports.
Okay, major 4 sports teams, which are, okay, football, basketball, baseball, hockey. Soccer, So do we want to consider soccer? And then, okay, so we can absolutely consider soccer. My son will be happy to hear that. Did I hear cricket? Yeah, we don't have long enough in the semester to watch even 2 games, I think. But it's interesting. I mean, do you consider something like cricket or rugby? What about tennis, where you can have teams tennis? You can have a pair. That could be a team sport. Do we want to have a certain minimum number of players? The more players you have on a team, to some extent, the less possible contribution you can have. Years ago, I think it was the Buffalo Bills signed a quarterback from, I think it was the University of Arizona, who spent most of his college career on his back gazing at stars. Why was that the case? Bad offensive line. That's generous to say it was a bad offensive line. But every now and then the line held. And what they said is, if you look at his statistics, when he actually had a chance to set and throw and had a receiver open, he was really good. And so for team sports, it's often extremely hard to determine how good someone is because of the system that they're in. So what is the greatest franchise in professional sports history? Okay, Yankees, that's wrong, but good guess. Boston Celtics is defensible, but I would probably choose somebody other than the Celtics. I'm sorry? No. Nope. No, Lakers aren't even in the discussion. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to make it easy for you. I wore my Lego shirt earlier today when I was teaching the Lego class. But I would say the New England Patriots, for the 20 years roughly of Brady, is, I think, the greatest franchise of all time. Other franchises had better championship records, but when you look at the environment the Patriots played in the old days, you could lock up players. And so this is why it becomes so difficult to compare different sports in different eras. We have to figure out what statistics do we want to look at. When Bill Russell played for the Celtics, they won the championship, I think, 9 out of 11 years. And in one of the 2 years, they still made it to the finals. No team, not even the Yankees, have had such a dominance, over a decade, the Bill Russell Celtics. Why is this not as impressive in basketball? Yeah, back at the time, there weren't that many teams. What else? Level of the game in what sense? Right, so nowadays you might actually have a larger pool and you might have more talent spread out. Back then, if there's not as much talent, it might be more likely that one team could concentrate talent. Yeah, they play series, so it's much easier for teams to win in a series than in a Super Bowl. In a Super Bowl, it's one and done. And anything can happen in one day. You can be unlucky once. The longer the series and the more series you have, the more likely it is that the best team is going to make it. Finally, in the NCAA in the last few years, a number 1 seed has taken down a number 16 seed. But for the longest time, that never happened. But you would expect, strange things like this to happen occasionally. One of the worst things is to be overly sensitive to small data sets. I'm going to assume everybody here watches baseball. I love it when the announcers talk about, oh, this is a favorable profile. He's 7 for 13 against this pitcher. Well, you're talking about a data set of 13, and when you have so many pitches you've seen on the order of 10 to 20 pitches, some pitches it's going to look very favorable, some it's going to look very unfavorable. It's a small enough data set that it is not really that significant. One of my favorites was when the Red Sox, in the greatest comeback of all time in sports history, came back down 3-0 against the Yankees. This was the first time in baseball a team had come back down 3 games. It had happened in basketball and in hockey in best of 7s, but never in baseball. I think it had been something like 24 attempts. How often would you expect a team to come back down 3-0 in a best of 7? There's multiple correct answers. Give me a possible answer and defend it. There's no right answer in this class. It's just, what can you defend? And how convincingly can you defend it? So give me a simple explanation for chance of coming back. Yes.
Chances of taking.
Okay, and what would you say that should be? When you say sub 10%, do you mean for each game or for the product? So you think the product should be less than 1%?
Say it's close to 50-50. So chance.
Okay, so 1/2 to the 14th is 1/16. If you multiply 16 by 5, you get 80. So that's 5/80ths. So it's a little bit more than 5%. So you want to get some rough senses of numbers. So that's assuming that you have a 50-50 chance of winning. Do you think that's a reasonable assumption? Well, that's the thing is you actually have some data. Maybe the reason you're down 3-0 is you're not as good of a team. Could be home field advantage as well as to how do the final games, the 4 games remaining, how do they stack? Pitcher matchups. Do you have, I mean, for the Red Sox, when they came back against the Yankees, it was unclear if Schilling would be able to pitch. And Wakefield does not get nearly enough credit in many people's books for eating up innings for the Red Sox, where he allowed the bullpen to recover. And so when you're answering a question like this, what are the probabilities? Well, if you say it's 1 in 16, if there's only been 24 attempts where a team's been down 3-0, you would expect 1-2 times maybe that somebody comes back. So 0 out of 24, that's not that surprising. So you've got to be extremely careful with what statistic you look at. We're going to talk a lot about that. One of my favorite things to do is to give information in a very misleading manner, which you can do this all the time. If I tell you, I know some of you have had me in class before, that a team has won 3 of their last 4 games, that's a 75% winning percentage. Is the team doing well or not? Oh, 4 games. But I'm saying, in general, if I tell you a team has won 3 of their last 4 games, you think the team is playing well. What happened 4 games ago? I've told you they've won 3 of their last 4 games. I'm choosing to tell you they've won 3 of their last 4. What must have happened 4 games ago? They lost. Otherwise, I would have said they've won 3 in a row. So because I'm not saying they've won 3 in a row, we know they lost 4 games ago. So they've only won, I'm sorry, they won 4 games ago. They didn't lose 4 games ago. They had to have won 4 games ago, and they have a loss in their last 3, which means they're 2-1 in their last 3. What happened 5 games ago? They lost. Otherwise, I'd say they've won 4 out of 5. So they're really 3-2 in their last 5. They're 2-1 in their last 3. But if I look at it just the right way, and this is what Scott Boras and people like him are very good at, you can make a compelling argument for what you're advancing, that the team is hot. So when you're trying to find statistics, be very careful that are you really finding a statistic that is representative and does what we want it to do. So in terms of trying to figure out, step 1 is what sports we want to do. So we definitely want to do the 4 majors plus, soccer. Is there any other sport people want to throw into the mix? Okay, so for now, we'll confine ourselves to that, and we'll see how people spread out among those different categories. The next question is, if you're trying to figure out the GOAT of all GOATs, then you need to figure out what is the contribution of the, yes?
Boxing.
If we're trying to do team sports, I would say no. WWF with some, tag team wrestling, maybe, but the question is whether or not that's a sport or a show. So I don't know as much about Formula. How is that a team? Are you talking about like the pit crew?
There's like a team championship.
Right. Well, I mean, I know for some things, in the Tour de France, the people each year who are not excluded because of doping, you have some people whose job it is to, break the wind in the beginning, and then it doesn't really matter what their time is going to be. They'll eventually fade back while they let someone else go in. And so cycling is absolutely a team sport. And so that is, something you could easily put into the mix And you could throw then as, is Lance Armstrong, the greatest of all time. Again, one of the questions when you have something like this is, do we put asterisks by certain players? I love, having seen the asterisk ball that, Bonds used to break, Aaron's record in the Hall of Fame. If you look at one of his seasons where I think he had 120 intentional walks, it was just absolutely amazing. The stats he put up in that year. I think it was like 2002, 2004, something like that. Was it 4? Okay. And so what do you do now? And this is the difficulty the Hall of Fame voters are having right now in baseball, where you have certain people like Alex Rodriguez, who is now on the ballot. What do you do? So when we're doing conversations like this, if there is a player under consideration who has known performance enhancement issues, do we want to exclude them from the conversation? The list I've seen so far, Barry Bonds absolutely would have to be on any list of all-time greatest baseball players. So if we're trying to figure out who's the GOAT of all GOATs, we need to figure out how valuable is somebody in their sport, and then compare different sports. So does anybody have a statistic they like for how valuable a player is? Yeah, I love wins above replacement. At the end of the day, we're concerned with winning. But again, a lot of your statistics are a function of who is on your team. When Barry Bonds had no good hitters following him, it really wasn't that difficult of a decision to just intentionally walk him. Or if not intentionally walk him, just pitch around him, no good pitchers, because he can't win you. His value is much greater when he has somebody good behind him. When Randy Moss came to the Patriots, what was his main job? One is to catch deep balls, but there was something else. Yeah, draw out coverage is you couldn't really play him, man on man. And so if you have 2 people on him, well, then you open up someone else. And so when you look at his stats, if someone else is making the catch, he's not being rewarded appropriately. And so this is why it is so difficult sometimes to figure out what is the contribution, what is the value of a given player. If his main job is to free up someone else who then makes the catch, it still helps the team win. So what statistic, they use this a lot in basketball, hockey, and I think soccer, would take into account something like this. It's a very simple statistic, plus minus. How is the team doing with you on the field versus off the field? And in a statistic like that, you would really see the advantage of a Randy Moss running around in terms of how well you're doing. The more pieces you have, the harder it is to take into account what's the contribution of an individual. I moved to Williamstown in 2008 in the summer. And so I don't know how well people know their history of football. 2008 season. Anybody know what happened to the Patriots? I'm sorry? No, not 2008. That's when Brady got hurt. And so, I go to turn on the first game of the season and go, Bills, Josh, TV's out of Albany. And so we're getting the Bills-Jets game, and I'm just watching on the bottom of the screen for updates on the Patriots game. So, gee, the game's been stuck at 12 minutes, 30 seconds for quite a long time. I hope no one's hurt. And so Brady was knocked out, didn't play the rest of the season. Who knows who was brought in? Matt Castles. When was the last time Matt Castles started a game? Before that, high school. He did not start a game at USC. And the Patriots went 11-5 that year, I believe, and missed the playoffs on like the 3rd or 4th round tiebreak. Compare this to the Indianapolis Colts when Peyton Manning went down, and then I think the Colts lost something like 11 in a row. Might have been 12, something like that. Yeah, I mean, they were horrendous that year. So in terms of trying to figure out what is the value of a player, this is where a lot of people say it's the Patriots system that was so valuable. When Brady went down, the Patriots were still able to go 11-5. In other years, when they brought in other people, it's not that way now. You know, in the old days, as a Patriots fan, you just had to turn on the TV in December. That was okay. Nowadays, you actually have to watch the whole season. But the system was such that they could actually survive something like that. It's really hard sometimes to figure out the value of a person because you have so many other parts going around. Football is hell, for the statisticians for this reason. Baseball is much easier because you can isolate what's going on. We have really nice formulas, one created to try to figure out what is the value of adding someone to the lineup, what is the value of, some pitcher. So if you're trying to figure out the value of somebody, WAR, wins above replacement, is a great statistic. If I'm ever using a statistic you don't know of, just raise your hand, or if you don't want to look foolish in front of people, just email me afterwards. But again, there's so many different statistics that I'm sure that statistics I don't know, and I'll be raising my hand at some point. If people want to try to do the GOAT of all GOATs, we can try to do that, but it's really hard to do it, first of all, within a sport. And then the second is, how do you compare across sports? In basketball, you have much more control as an individual over your team than you're going to have in football. If you're a pitcher in baseball, you basically come in, if you're a starter, once every fourth or fifth game. How do you want to compare something like that? And so this is why I'm happy to have conversations on GOAT of all GOATs, but when I was working with my colleague Rick on this, we very quickly came to the realization there's no good way to have a conversation on this in a definitive manner across sports. It's hard enough to just compare different positions in the sport. So in the end, to just rhyme with GOAT, I chose both, best of all teammates. And this has no value attached to it. We're not saying you contributed at all. You could just be sitting on the bench. Who has witnessed the most success? Now, of course, if all you're doing is sitting on the bench, you're not going to be on the bench for that long. And then you have to ask yourself, how do you want to reward someone? Which is more important? Wins, championships, getting close to the championship, longevity, doing it over a longer period of time. We have to decide what we care about. I will risk saying this joke. Does anybody know who a lot of poor kids in the third world believe is the greatest NFL franchise of all time? Yes, the Bills. Why the Bills? They make shirts before the Super Bowl with each one as the winner. So for 4 straight years, you have Buffalo Bills, Super Bowl champions. And well, they're going to do something to the shirt. So they send them to poor people all over the world. They did it again. 4 straight. Well, no, not the 4 straight you're thinking of, 4 straight losses. I hope the Bills do it this year. It would be nice to have them finally get a win. How much credit do you give to coming to the Super Bowl and losing 4 straight years versus winning the Super Bowl once and finishing dead last in 3? As a fan, which would you rather see? I'd rather see 1 win for my team in 3 very bad years. And if you look at the Sox from 2018 onward, they've basically given us that in some. But do you want to give credit? How much credit do you want to give to getting close? For the Ohio State fans, that was a close one, but at the end of the day, we get nothing from it. Georgia, they squeaked it out. TCU squeaked it out against Michigan. And so for a lot of things, you can have a very staggered system where winning the championship counts a huge amount, getting to the championship counts less, getting to the conference final counts less, and deciding how much of a spread do you want? How much do you want to give? What is the main objective of owners of Major League franchises? One is to make money, and the other one is to win championships. And some people care more about one than the other. I think after the Marlins won, the owner was quite content to just sell the team. But some people are willing to run up debt. I've got more than enough money. I care about my city, my region. I want to bring home the title. And so when you're trying to decide what you're doing, some people might say, if we don't win the championship, it's not a good deal. It's not enough to be competitive. Others might decide, we're just trying to make money. If we get into the playoffs, that's good enough. And so when you're trying to figure out what the value of someone is, value is never an absolute term. It's always relative to who else do you have. Who wants to give me the best soccer/football player of all time? All right, so we'll go with Messi. So if we have Messi, nothing against my friends here at Williams, playing with the Williams soccer team, how valuable will Messi be? I'm sorry? But do you think the Williams team with Messi could compete on the world stage? No. So what would his value be on a team with a Williams college? Yeah, they would. I mean, let's say they got to play against France or England or that powerhouse Saudi Arabia. All right, so enough people are laughing that I know you did watch the World Cup. Right. How much value would you assign to Messi if he's on the Williams soccer team? It really doesn't matter if the Williams soccer team has him. It's not enough to be competitive. And so when you're trying to figure out what is the value of a player, it's really hard when you have to look at all these different pieces. And so when we're trying to figure out how good is someone, the next issue that we really need to think about is what your competition is like. Do we have any tennis fans? Not too many. I'm old, so I remember the glory days of Sampras and Agassi. You might remember Nadal and Federer. If one of those pairs was not present, the other would have so many more titles. So a lot of times, what really matters is how good is your next best competition. And if you happen to be coming in at the right time and you don't have a strong another competition, then you're going to get a lot more titles. And a lot of it's just the luck of the draw. So the point today is to just get these things on your radar so that we can come up with exactly what we want to study. And so best of all teammates is just trying to figure out who has seen the most success and then decide how we want to measure success. There are a lot of people in the world who are bean counters. There are certain numbers that they love. So if you're a baseball, what offensive statistics do people love? I'm sorry? Okay, I'm talking about old people who don't know good statistics. Okay, batting average. What batting average would they want to see? North of 300. What else would you want in baseball? RBIs. What else? Earned run average. What else? Home runs. What might be a magic number Hall of Fame level for home runs? 500. If you had 500 home runs, you're in the conversation for Hall of Fame. 400 maybe. 500 absolutely. How about hits? What's the magic number? 3,000. Have you ever seen the movie Mr. 3000? Anybody seen that? It's a Bernie Mac comedy where it turns out he is a selfish bastard. And as soon as he gets his 3,000th hit, he walks away from his team in the middle of the season and then has an entire business devoted to Mr. 3000. And he believes he's going to get into the Hall of Fame, no problem. And then it turns out as they're reviewing his case, he was accidentally credited twice with hits in a game because there was a rain delay. And he now only has 2,997, and he has to come back and get 3 more hits. There's the magic number of 3,000. Well, if you look at it as an analyst, continuity, there's really not much of a difference between 2,997 career hits and 3,001. But in a lot of people's mind, there are these big barriers. And so, Red Sox had a string of wonderful outfielders. Williams succeeded by Jimmy Rice. And Rice took a long time to get into the Hall of Fame. He was one of the most feared people offensively for years, but he didn't play as long as a lot of people. So he didn't reach those great numbers. And so the question was, should he have stayed on for a couple more years with mediocre performance to hit these milestones and get the longevity card? Or is it better to say, look, I'm not as productive as I once was. There are people who can do a better job. I've got other things I can do. And when people are making votes for Hall of Fame, it's an interesting question as to how much do you weight the longevity, the length that you've done things. Different sports have different life expectancies. Football, Brady is almost my age and is still playing. This is a little bit unusual. I'm just a little bit south of 50. How about receivers? Gronk has been injured so many times, and he has come back, but he's done coming back. And so what do you do about certain positions that don't have the same longevity as others, or certain sports where the average number of years, even for the greats, is not the same as others. How do you want to do these comparisons? In baseball, we have ballpark effects. And so you could say, this is a very hitter-friendly park. Anybody want to give me an example of a hitter-friendly park? I'm sorry? Yankee Stadium, which was deliberately designed based on who they thought was going to be on the lineup. Yep. What else? Coors. Now, they do have the humidor at Coors to deaden the balls, but when Coors Field first came into rotation, it was a hitter's paradise in terms of deep shots. What else? The foul territory might be less than the distance between the desk and the wall. Fenway Park, very little foul territory, so a foul ball is not going to turn into an out, which means the batter has another chance. Also, very high green monster, it's going to prevent a lot of home runs, but it's going to make a lot of outs become singles or doubles. And so when you have ballparks that are not standardized, we have ways to compare and adjust numbers from one park to another. And if people are interested, I've got a couple of books in my office that you'll go through how do you do these calculations and compare somebody who's hitting primarily in these parks versus somebody in these parks. A lot of people don't realize this when they leave their team. You were playing in a ballpark that was very friendly to you, to your hitting style and your strengths. And you're playing half your games there. And now when you go to a new team, you may not be seeing the same offensive performance based on that. So again, right now, I just want to get these questions on your horizon in terms of what do you want to do? However you want to take this is fine. It's worth spending some time in the beginning just thinking amongst yourselves, what do we want to do? What do we care about? Which statistics do we think really matter? So I don't want to go through the whole work in progress. Were there any questions people had from the video you were supposed to watch? This was one of my favorite slides of all time. I can't remember if I said this in the lecture. So this is two different websites listing who's in first place in the American League East on a specific day, June 4, 2018. And one of them correctly has the Sox above the Yankees. The other one incorrectly has the Yankees above the Sox. And it comes down to what statistic are you looking at? One of them is doing it by win percentage, and the Yankees had a slightly better win percentage. But amazingly, at this point in the season, the Sox had played 6 more games than the Yankees, going 4-2, which actually lowered their winning percentage. And so if you look at games back, you've got the Yankees in first place, 1 game behind the Red Sox. What's wonderful is if you actually go online and look at this now, it no longer has it ordered like this because they finished one of the games that was rain delayed. And the Yankees, I believe, lost that. And so when you put that in, it then adjusts things. And this is like 1984. And it now goes back in time and adjusts what the standings were at that day. So be very careful about what statistics you're looking at. Which statistic do you think matters more, win percentage or games back? I think games back, because at the end of the year, if the games matter, you're going to have to play them. And what really matters is if the Yankees don't go 4-2 in their remaining 6 games. Now, the Yankees are playing .685 ball right now. They should be able to go 4-2. As you could calculate, what's the probability the Yankees go 4-2, which means they'd be tied with the Sox, versus going 5-2, 6-0. I'm sorry, 5-1, 6-0, or having at most 3 wins. All right, so out of curiosity, so here are a couple of the names that we threw out for who we think the best candidate is, greatest of all time. Brady for the NFL, Russell for the NBA, Babe Ruth for MLB. There is a certain player right now for the Angels that I think eventually might be able to join the conversation. Who am I thinking of? I'm sorry? Yep. Like Ruth, he's one of the only people to be productive both as a hitter and a pitcher. And again, it's extremely hard to compare people across different eras. There were many years when Babe Ruth had more home runs than all but one team in baseball that year. Which was the team he did not out-hit? Yeah, his own team. There was one year when CC Sabathia led both the American League and the National League in complete games. Or was it shutouts? I mean, maybe it was shutouts. I think it was shutouts. Shutouts are complete, one of them, because he was traded mid-season. And so, again, a lot of it is looking at what are you doing relative to everyone else. When you put Babe Ruth's home run numbers in context compared to what else was going on at the time, it's absolutely amazing. You don't have that level of dominance now. How do you take something like that into account? Are there any other people that you want to throw out into the mix right now? For hockey, there's an obvious candidate. Wayne Gretzky. Yes. Michael Jordan for basketball is another obvious candidate. What do you have? Now for Jordan, before we get to, one of the issues with Jordan is he has that 2-year gap. What do you do about that? It has that gap. There's nothing you can really do. Yeah.
Did you say that in the discussion of that 2-year gap, of course, the Bulls still went far, but they did not win a title, losing to the Rockets. But
right.
Would that be, in this case, considered complementary to the idea? Like basic game.
So you could try to use this to try to get a sense of how valuable was Jordan. Is when you remove him, how is the team doing? How similar is the team when he comes back? So one thing, if you're trying to figure out what is the value of the person, is look and see how much is the team changing from year to year.
Also,
Right. And I think Bo Jackson also did it, and Danny Ainge did it. He played at third base for the Blue Jays as well as for the Celtics. So there's not that many people who have done it, but there's a few who have. And so what you could do is you could look at their contribution in each sport and sum. My feeling is any of those players, they've lost too many quality years from one sport where they weren't playing at the highest level, that they're not going to make the final list. But, again, in the beginning, it's better to be expansive and think of all the possible people we want to consider. And I'll set up a Google Doc later. Yes. Yep.
Consider a better teammate if
Well,
organizations want to spend instead, put some money rather than a team that does.
okay. Say it again. So someone on the Yankees.
Two teams. They're identical in skill,
Okay.
but one is going to have $80 million to spend into the.
Right.
If you were a star player on the team with an extra $80 million, your chances to win the title, independent of your own skill, will be greatly increased.
Absolutely. Because you have a team that can actually buy more. And so if you care about winning versus profitability, you might be willing to go into debt. I think the Mets now, are they now the biggest debtors? Up to 800 million. It's incredible. And we actually have several Williams alums who are working with the Mets. So I'm sure most of you know who they are. We will try to get them to campus at some point. Right. We think. You can absolutely include current players. And part of it could be trying to figure out, is there anybody going on right now? But again, a lot of it is going to be the metric of what are we studying? If we care about championships, somebody like Ted Williams, who went to war twice, I believe, during his prime time, this destroyed a lot of his career, his golden years. And the Sox never won it all. But we're not talking about who's the most valuable player. That's why we're looking at best of all teammates. Who has seen the most success? And you have to decide, what do you mean by success? Is success winning the ring? Is it getting close to the ring? How much more do you give somebody for the championship versus getting to the championship and losing? Is the Super Bowl worth 4 points, winning the conference championship, but losing the Super Bowl 2 points, making it to the conference championship, but losing worth 1 point, maybe making it to the playoffs, but losing in the first round 0.5 point? You have to figure out what skill you want to do. And depending on the skill you choose, you can greatly change the result you get. If you make winning the championship worth 10 points and getting to the championship but losing worth 2 points, then one win is tremendously more valuable. The 4 Buffalo losses would be 8 points and 1 ring would be 10. Do you like that? Does that make you feel good? How many of you are math majors? If you're math majors, have you heard of the Banach-Tarski paradox? That there's a way to take a sphere and chop it up into 5 pieces. And if you rotate and translate 2 of the pieces here and 3 of the pieces here, if you rotate and translate, that shouldn't change the volume. When you take these 2 pieces and put them together, you get a solid sphere again of the same radius. And when you do it for the other 3 pieces, you get a solid sphere of the same radius. And these 5 pieces are disjoint. You should not be able to cut a sphere up into 2 spheres of the same volume. And if this works for sphere, I could take a stack of $100 bills or a block of gold and do this and make a lot of money. It requires something called the axiom of uncountable choice. The divisions are so bad we can't even describe them. And there are some people who don't believe in the uncountable axiom of choice precisely for reasons like this. So in terms of what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to consider, it can get very strange. So we need to decide what we're going to be looking at. We need to decide what statistics really matters to us, how much weight we want to give to everything. And depending on the weights you choose, you can get anything you want as your final answer. If we make winning the championship 100 points and the next only 5 points, there's such a bias towards winning the championship. If you make it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, there's not that much more of a value. You might choose different values in different sports. It's easier to win a championship in basketball as a good team than it is in football. And in the talk, I give a rough argument as to why a factor of 1.8 might be reasonable for 2 strong teams. But again, you have to figure out length of series, the number of series you have to do. Do you have buys? There's so many different things going on. Home field advantage in football for that 1 game. Tampa Bay has just locked up their division, correct? They're going to get a home game, right? What is the odds that they'll be playing a team that has a better record than them? Pretty good. I know a couple of years ago, the Seahawks made it into the playoffs, winning the NFC West with a 7-9 record. And to truly understand just how bad a 7-9 record is, what you need to do is you look at the division and remove all internal games. Because internal games, the division is going to go 500. So if they're winning at 7-9, and you want to look at how good is the division, look at the division against other divisions. It was atrocious. It was, I think, like around 250. They got a home game against, I believe it was the Saints. Yep. And they beat the Saints. So home field matters tremendously when you're doing calculations like this. So there's lots of different things you need to consider. All right. So we talked about just some of the calculations. And just, this is one of my favorite plots, is looking at the probability of beating a weaker team as a function of the number of games in the series. And it makes sense, the higher your probability of winning, the less it's really going to matter. Yes.
Better teams. Baseball or basketball.
Right.
Going to 7-2. Worst teams be better teams.
Yes, and that would be a really interesting thing to look at as to how sport dependent is this. Where are you more likely to see upsets? I also think baseball doesn't have the extremes you have in football. In terms of football, you have teams that get very close to, say, 1 or 2 losses out of 16. I guess now it's 17 games. Whereas in baseball, even the best teams are not playing 800 ball. But you'll see that in basketball. You'll see that in football. Because one of the teams should be I'm looking at the better team, and so the better team should have at least a 50% chance of winning. And so I'm plotting the probability of the better team winning. So if the 2 teams are equally skilled, they have the same chance of winning, then it doesn't matter how long the series is. Each team should win half the time. If you win 100% of the games, it doesn't matter how many games the series is, you're going to win. And that's why it ends at that point and they all become the same. But what's fascinating is if you look in this region, just seeing the difference in the length of the series. the longer the series is, the better chance you have if you're a little bit better of eventually winning. So if I have a 51% chance of flipping a head and you have a 49% chance of flipping a tail, and we're going to play for $1 million. Are you excited? One toss. You win, you get $1 million. I win, I get $1 million. You have a 49% chance of winning. Are you happy? No downside. And do you think you have a decent chance of walking away with $1 million? Yes. Unfortunately, the endowment took a hit, so we unfortunately don't have the funds to do that. I do apologize. What if I tell you we're going to do this 1,000,000 times? And if we have more heads, I win, and we have more tails, you win. With 1,000,000 tosses, how comfortable are you that you're going to get more tails than heads? A lot less. With 1,000,000 tosses, it's not that likely. If we do 1,000,000,000 tosses, it's extremely unlikely that you will have more tails than heads. And that small little percent win is going to be more than enough. For those of you who are interested in gambling, Vegas and casinos, they make their profits on small margins like this. All right. One of the things we tried to look at was, trying to look at, Brady, versus next 5, Russell versus next 2, next 5, trying to look at how much bigger their numbers were than their competitors, just trying to find what's a good statistic. I'm just putting these out there as things that you might want to think about, trying to look at how good are they relative to who else is around them. And then your conference championships, conference championships, just making the playoffs. I think this is Brady's 20th season, or is it his 20th, maybe his 21st season and 20th playoff appearance, something like that. You're absolutely incredible. I'll skip this for now. All right. And so what I want to do now is I want to do a little bit of math that wasn't done in the talk about just, this is supposed to have a math course designation, so we'll do a little bit of math. So I hope everybody has heard of means and averages. So if I give you two numbers, X and Y, let's say they're positive numbers, the average or the arithmetic mean is just X plus Y over 2. It turns out that this is not the only mean you can define between two numbers. So what kind of properties would you want the mean to have? And the reason I want to do this is I really want you to be thinking about statistics. What statistic do you want? And is the statistic doing the job you hope it does? A lot of times people have numbers that have absolutely nothing to do with anything meaningful, but because there's a number attached to it, people assign meaning. What does an IQ test measure? No. The IQ test does not measure your intelligence. Somewhat. It measures your intelligence quotient, which is that which is measured by the intelligence test. The hope is that this is correlated to intelligence. One of my students, I was talking with him about statistics and representing quantities in meaningful ways recently. And he showed me the following. If you take all the water on the earth and shrink it so it fills an Olympic-sized pool, the amount that would be drinkable water would be 1 drop. When you hear this, what do you think? Is that a lot? Is that a little? Is this alarming? I'm sorry? It's a tiny amount. Well, what if I tell you there's enough drinking water on the earth for 1,000,000 years? But there's a tremendous amount of non-drinkable water. So when I swing it down to just 1 drop, it seems like a very small amount, but it's more than enough for all of our needs. So a lot of times people present statistics in a way that just really is not anything that you can relate to. So if anybody's interested, there's some great books about how to talk about numbers in a way that people can understand. Anybody ever go to a dentist office? Anybody ever get an X-ray? What do? They put on a lead bib. Why? Radiation. And what does the technician do? Gets out of the room. There was a science article I read years ago that was talking about some energetic radiation. And to put it in context, they said, imagine you had a lead bib stretching from the sun to Pluto. That would not be enough to stop this. Okay, I can get a sense of what that means in terms of just how energetic this is. Wow, it can go through lead that far, we're talking about, 6 light hours. That's tremendous. So try to come up with ways to put things in context that people can discuss. So what properties would you want a mean to have? When you're trying to come up with statistics, you can make up any statistic you want. Does it help answer the question? And the question is typically, what's your chance of winning? What's your chance of getting a championship? What's your value to the team? It's great if you have these statistics, but if they're not measuring what you want them to measure. So what properties do you think the mean of two numbers x and y should have? 0 less than x, less than or equal to y. It should be between x and y. What else? Are there any special cases of x and y where you know what the mean should be? So in general, it should be somewhere between x and y. If they're the same, then it should be that. So I am looking for functions such that the mean is between x and y. So we'll say less than or equal, so x less than or equal to mean, less than or equal to y. And now if x equals y, they collapse and the mean would have to be that. So the standard is the arithmetic mean. It turns out this is not the only one. I'm not going to go through the math that it works. I'll trust you can all do that. So we want another thing that's going to satisfy x less than or equal to the mean of x, y. Does anybody know another function that works? Yes. The geometric mean. And so the square root of xy. And so just to use a numerical test, if I do 2 and 8, the square root of 16 is 4, and that's between 2 and 8, 1 and 100. So the geometric mean, it's not that bad to show, is always going to be between x and y. The algebra, I think, is on the next few slides. Again, you can look at this or just do it at your leisure. So it turns out this is another notion of mean. Which is a better notion? And better in what sense? It's going to depend on the problem you're looking at. So we have two different choices. So if I give you 2 and 8, the arithmetic mean is 5, the geometric mean is 4. If I give you 3 and 12, it's 7.5 and 6. This is somewhat comparable. But what if you take some extreme cases? I always love looking at extreme cases. So if x is 1 and y is very large, then the arithmetic mean is going to be the midpoint of y over 2, roughly. But the geometric mean will be the square root of y, which is much, much smaller. And so a lot of times you want to figure out how sensitive is your statistic to various things. How many of you have taken at least one stats class? Okay. How many of you have done linear regression? All right, so when we do linear regression, we use the method of least squares. We count errors by squaring. Why do we use squares? Right, so we don't want positive and negative errors to cancel, but we could use absolute values, and then that would get rid of that problem. So why do we use squares and not absolute values? This is the difference between a mathematician teaching the subject and a statistician. So squares, very large errors get magnified. So one error of 10 is worse than 5 errors of 2. Well, that's a strike against using squares. That's saying we should use absolute values, but we don't. So why are we always using squares? So you've taken stats. Why are we doing this? So sometimes things are taught biblically. Moses came down from Mount Sinai with a bunch of rules and laws and things to do. It's always worth asking, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this as opposed to something else? How many of you have taken Calc 1? Calc 2? Calc 3? Right. A lot of hands are up. You've spent a lot of time invested in all this calculus. It turns out calculus can be used to find optimal values, can optimize problems. And if we use squares, the square function x squared is differentiable. And you can use calculus and linear algebra to come and write down a closed form expression for the best fit line. If you use absolute values, the absolute value function is not differentiable. And now all the tools and techniques of calculus are not available. And so if you want to find the best fit line using absolute values, you have to roll up your sleeves and you have to do some numerical simulation and coding. And so because of that, for a lot of applications, it is easier to use squares. The way I like to phrase it is if I'm being hired, I use squares. If I'm hiring someone, I ask them to use absolute values. For many things, the absolute values actually does a better job, but it's not as tractable. So here, we see that there's going to be a real difference between the geometric mean and the arithmetic mean. And there's lots of different results you can do. You can actually prove that the geometric mean is always going to be less than equal to the arithmetic mean. I'll just have it over here just so that, you can hit pause. I'll make the slides available just so the proof is there. It's pretty straightforward algebra. You can then talk about extensions. And this is something you should always be thinking about when you are doing any type of research. Now that I have this, what else can I do? What if I have 3 objects? Well, it might be natural to say the arithmetic mean is the sum divided by 3. The geometric mean might be the product and take it to the 1/3 power. But is there another combination? What if I want to look at, say, xy plus yz plus xc? What's nice about that is I'm taking everything in groups of 2. Any thoughts about what I should divide by and what power I should take it to? So we're trying to do xy plus yz plus zx divided by a to the b. So if it's a mean, it's got to satisfy x is less than equal to the triple mean is less than equal to z. And if they're all the same, the triple mean needs to be x. So thoughts about what a should be and what b should be. Well, I said if x equals y equals z, then you get x squared plus x squared plus x squared over a to the b. So 3x squared over a. So what might you guess? A equals what? B equals what? Yeah, I would guess A equals 3, B equals not 2. 1/2, yeah. And so that would be an extremely natural guess. And then you can prove that this actually has all the desired properties. And if I had 4 quantities, I might have x, y, z. Oh, no, I guess we do wxy plus wyz plus ... divide by what raised to what, and try to figure out what should be going on there. And looking at all the different combinatorics that come in, binomial coefficients would come into play. But always think about when you have something, how can you generalize? Always, always, always think about extreme cases. Who can tell me what the quarterback rating is? Who knows, who's heard of the quarterback rating? What's a good quarterback rating number? I'm sorry? 100. How do you compute the quarterback rating? See, this is a 21st century statistic. Earned run average. Okay, I look at how many innings they've pitched. That's my denominator. I look at how many runs they've been charged. That's the numerator. And I take into account the fact that we do things in 9s. And I can calculate the earned run average. Batting average, again, simple statistic you can calculate very easily. For the quarterback rating, this depends on receptions, touchdowns, turnovers, yardage, completion percents or attempts as well. Very complicated statistic. But at the end of the day, it's been normalized, so you don't need to know all the stuff that's running under the hood. You can get a number and it's scaled, so 100 and higher is good. 60 and below is very bad. Are there any Jets fans here? Okay. I'm sorry, but I have to say the following. The Jets were the only team that could bench a quarterback and somehow piss off 3 quarterbacks as this happened. This was a couple of years ago. And they put in not the quarterback people were expecting, and he had an atrocious game against the Bills. He was 2 for 8 with 3 interceptions. If you viewed him as playing for the Buffalo Bills, his number was actually better. When you have some statistics, sometimes in extreme cases, the statistics don't do a good job of explaining just what's going on. You might be so good that you're off the scale and we can't really describe what's going on. You might be so bad similarly. We expect a certain level of competence. We expect you to be in this band. And if you're really far away from it, we just don't know how to evaluate you because you're just so different. Anybody ever read Ender's Game? Anybody ever read Ender's Shadow, which is told from the point of view of Bean? And so Ender and Bean were the 2 greatest kids in that book, and they were just so far above everyone else. It was just really hard to talk about how do you compare them to everyone else. And that could be a problem that you get as you get to the extremes. There's not that many data points. When you're trying to look at you're the greatest of all time, it's not a large comparison group. And so a lot of the standard metrics may not really apply in a situation like this. So the hardest part of projects like this is trying to figure out, what do you want to study? Once you know that, well, then we have trained monkeys in this class who know how to code. You can cull things from online data sets, and we can do various analyses and try to figure out what is the best. But we need to figure out what is the right statistic. And it's okay if we change our mind as the term continues. The goal is to get a paper on this. There's a lot of sports analytic conferences. There's one typically every year in Boston. So for people who are not graduating, there's a great chance of being able to go there, present a paper, meet people like that. I am teaching a class in the spring, the math of sports. If anybody's interested in pursuing questions like this further, always happy to have people in the class like this. All right, so I wanted to talk for on the order of an hour. We started a little bit late because I know some people are going to come a little bit late. I want to leave some time right now in case anybody has questions. Yes.
So what is the agenda for lessons?
Right. So are people able to come tomorrow at 1? So as many people who can, tomorrow at 1, come. And what I want you to do tonight is think about, what sport do you want to look at? You want to do baseball, basketball, hockey, football, soccer. And we will say soccer here just to distinguish it from football. And then we'll try to come up with short lists of who the people are, and then try to figure out, what do we want to define our metric for success to be. Unfortunately, the joint math meetings is the big math meeting of the year, and it starts this week. So I will be in Boston from Thursday to Saturday, Sunday. So this will give you a couple of days after that to just be thinking about it. And then we'll break into groups and start trying to do analyses and trying to figure out, first of all, how do we assign value to players in their own league? And then how do we compare league across league? Let me just hit pause for a second.